Welcome. You're listening to Guiding Stars in the Jeffrey Wolfe Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. This is Kristin Fontana, and I'm here with Stacie Pazura and a team of evolutionary astrologers to discuss the archetype of Sagittarius, Jupiter, and the ninth house, and how this archetype is expressed naturally. Here's our team today. We have with us Patricia Walsh, Simon Vorster, David Green, Moshe, and Marty Dixon. So I'm very excited about this team. We're not going to go in this exact order today, but they will all be with us and to discuss Sagittarius, and we are looking at Sagittarius in all of the various planets that you see in your birth chart, whether it's Saturn or Jupiter. We're going to address all of it today. And if you're tuning in for the first time, we've been moving through the zodiac and sharing how each house sign and planetary ruler are expressed naturally. We started with Aries and have arrived today at Sagittarius. Welcome, Stacie. I didn't let you say hello.
Hello.
Just running through like a stallion ready to go. Wild stallion that we are. All right. So souls who have Pluto in the ninth house or Sagittarius have had the desire and evolutionary need to understand life in a cosmological, metaphysical, philosophical, or religious context. It's the archetype in which a soul has the need to explain its connection to the universe in which we live. Last time when we looked at the eighth house in Scorpio, it generated the awareness of larger forces in the world, an energy that was sensed as something outside itself. As a result, there was a need to form a relationship to these forces in order to become identified and united with them. The relationship then allowed the soul to experience this energy directly, setting in motion a Plutonian metamorphosis to take place due to an osmosis that occurred of the other individual. In the ninth house, or Sagittarius, ruler Jupiter here, the desire has been to explain one's connection to larger forces. Where the eighth house Pluto soul sensed this connection, they sensed it. In the ninth house, or Sagittarius, the connection is known. As a result, these souls need full freedom to pursue whatever experience is necessary to discover the knowledge that explains these larger cosmological forces. As with other fire houses and signs, Sagittarian souls entered this world with a special sense of destiny, and which for these individuals is directly linked with the connection to these cosmological or metaphysical principles that explain their relationship to the world in which they live. Ninth house Pluto souls also inherently understand the fundamental truths that explain the existence of the world and the universe. And because of this, these souls desire to discover the natural laws that explain their connection to the world. They have necessarily had to develop a strong intuition and a sixth sense in order to tune into this truth. Souls with a strong Sagittarian nature know the truth when they hear it. They know what they know without knowing why they know it. And they kind of come to trust this truth. Many souls with ninth house Plutos are known as the gypsy spirits of our time, as they have traveled far and wide throughout many lifetimes and have incarnated into diverse cultures and countries all over the planet. It is also quite common for souls to leave their country of birth in which they felt inhibited or stifled in their pursuit of knowledge or truth. Because the drive for ninth house Pluto souls is to search for truth in an unrestricted way, feelings of alienation can arise from the limitations of society, because most cultures are based on a specific philosophical system arrived at by a general consensus, one that is rooted ultimately in limiting beliefs. So alienation is actually a natural emotion within these souls and a necessary experience, because it will foster an elimination of all barriers, individual or cultural, that are preventing a direct understanding of the principles that govern a holistic understanding of the total truth of all things. Next slide. As we do with every sign, we are looking at the chakras and to see which chakra Jupiter rules today. Jupiter rules the second chakra, the sacral chakra. When you think about it, Stacie, you can relate to this, I'm sure. The expression women's intuition, right? That second chakra, Jupiter rules with Neptune, that inner knowing and that ability to tune into something more eternal. So it is a second house ruled planet here. Okay, next. Stacie and I did a 3-part series on the Damon Archetype, which we talk a lot about in the School of Evolutionary Astrology. The Damon Archetype connects to souls that have spent preponderance amount of time in nature, with animals, with nature, in harmony with these animals within nature. And frankly, Damon souls feel more at home within nature than they do with humans. And the root of this archetype starts with Sagittarius. Obviously, half horse, half human. We can see that so beautifully reflected here. And it symbolizes nature itself, Jupiter, 9th house, and Sagittarius. And the key element for a Damon soul is the energy that within animals that connects to pure emotion. They do not have an agenda, these animals. So any thoughts you want to offer here, Stacie? You're a Damon soul. You know a lot about this, so.
Yeah. I mean, the most valuable thing to me on this planet is sentient life in every form that it comes. It's incredible. You know, you can have an insect on the tip of your finger and you can see its eyes looking back at you, or, you know, you can run into a bird or a deer or a moose, or, you know, who knows, a wolf. And it's all sentient life. We're all equal in that way. And that's really what the Damon soul strives to, that's the level the Damon soul strives to connect. Well, it doesn't even need to strive, it's just natural. And yeah, I just don't know what I would do if there wasn't wildlife and sentient life, because it really does give me an ultimate meaning. It makes this world worth living in, as hard as it can get. And you can really learn a lot from the creatures that you study. So.
Right, exactly. And this image has always been one of my favorites. If any of you are interested in learning more about the Damon archetype, or really are resonating with some of what we're talking about, you can check out that series on YouTube through the EA Zoom channel. So essentially, Damon souls are connected to, astrologically speaking, it's the mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And as I mentioned, the Damon archetype itself is Sagittarius. Its root is Sagittarius. And I know so much about the energy of a Damon soul, of course, as being one with nature, that energy of the free spirit, you know, always looking to the next horizon and being connected to really all living things in this way, where there's no separation. So one of the things I was thinking about recently, as I was coming across some images of the unlikely friends that have become so popular. I don't know how many books there are now, how many volumes of them there are, but the unlikely friends, when you put two animals that you could never even imagine being together, like this, a German Shepherd and an owl. This image is absolutely incredible. And the key element to understand is that when trust is established within an animal and a Damon soul, or an animal and a human, or an animal of one species and an animal of another, they can become friends. They can be connected. They can have a relationship, because the foundation of that energy is within the emotion of trust. I mean, look at this. Are you kidding me? I just can't melt. I'm just melting.
I've worked with burrowing owls before too, so it's like extra special for me. They're amazing birds.
I know, when you look at these images too, it just encourages, I hope it encourages all people to be able to get their guard down a little bit and not to have fear get in the way. Of course, the animals can sense our fear, right? When we're afraid of them. This woman is fearless and able to have this incredible connection and union relationship with this wild animal. Beautiful, it's gorgeous. This is very Sagittarian. It's international, multicultural, it's the animal kingdom. And of course, we all recognize this guy, the lion whisperer. And he looks like he was probably a lion in another life. What do you think? I do.
Oh, absolutely.
I can tell you. That's
Yeah.
what my radar is telling me.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say, like, kind of as to be responsible, not everyone can come up and
Right, of course.
You know, we can just think back to the Lion King on Netflix, and you know, someone got their arm ripped off, and so but it is possible. It just depends on the connection and the individuals involved.
Right. Don't try this at home, in other words, right?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, souls with a strong Sagittarian influence, 9th house, planets in Sagittarius. Nature is often their church. And you know, of course, Sagittarius, Jupiter in the 9th house does connect to religion. It does have a lot to do with the stage of evolution, how any soul experiences that 9th house, but this is a perfect example of a natural way of understanding it. And love is definitely my religion.
Mm-hmm.
Sagittarius, for sure.
Yes.
Okay, so Stacie, you came up with this great example, and just wanted to let you talk about Sir David Attenborough, who I just love listening to. I could listen to his voice and never tire of it. It's so soothing, it's so calming, it's so grounding, it's so peaceful. And so I want you to talk about him, and we'll share a bit more in it. I'll share some more after. Go ahead.
Yes. So David Attenborough, I believe his career started in the mid-50s, where he was a naturalist, an explorer. He was paid to travel the land and really get to know different environments, different populations. He went into forests, he went into deserts, he went into the ocean. And he's wildly famous just because of his gigs. I don't know, maybe that's not the right word, but being a narrator for nature programs. And he has this unbelievable skill of looking at an animal or something and conveying what's important to the life of that animal in a way that doesn't overly anthropomorphize. I can never say this word ever. Anthropomorphize. You know what I'm trying to say. He doesn't make them overly human, but he can describe them in such a way that we can relate to things that are universal, that are not exclusive to humans. They're actually they're inclusive of all of us, and he's so calming. He doesn't incite you. I remember I really got into him when I saw his series called The Life of Birds. And, being a bird lover and someone who's worked with birds closely, he just nailed it. He catches their breeding displays, their daily concerns, everything. And you can just learn so much through this man. And he has such a gentle way about him. And actually, when I suggested to talk about him, I didn't even realize that there is a documentary that Netflix just put out on Sir David Attenborough called A Life on This Planet. And he calls it his witness statement, where he has, over all of these years where he's been all over the world, he has had a front row seat to seeing what's happening to the environment and how it's whittling away and how imbalances are taking effect relative to where it used to be so much more stable. And this is an incredible show. I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, but it's incredible. It's really, I recommend it. So.
And at 93 years old, I think he wanted to kind of tie a bow on the whole thing. And part two, what he's wanting to do is educate people about how they can help participate in a recovery in a healing of this planet. Now, I'd like to add, we don't have a birth time on Sir David, but this was a a rectified chart, something close to this that felt very true and close. So since he has no planets in Sagittarius, the chart I actually saw had that Saturn in Scorpio retrograde right at the midheaven in the ninth, which is definitely a voice of authority on the subject. And I thought that looked like an accurate display of his life and his intention and his mission. And obviously that Pluto, the ruler of the Saturn, right on the North Node in the 5th house. So this is very cross-cultural, cross-continental, a far-reaching message. Of course, he was a broadcaster for PBS, or was it PBS?
BBC.
PBC, thank you. And he's got that wonderful voice. His Mercury in Aries is trining Neptune and sextiling Jupiter on the other side, which of course, Jupiter being the subject of today. And to have Jupiter in Aquarius and making these kinds of aspects can really have that soul using his voice in a way that resonates like through time and kind of helps bring the masses forward in some way, but also one of those recognizable voices. I mean, millions and millions of people could hear his voice and know exactly who it is with their eyes closed and not seeing him right in a picture. You just know it when you hear it, that kind of voice. So, and really a voice that can reach any walk of life who cares about nature, who cares about natural things. And so you can see it even though without a birth time and without any planets in Sagittarius, how that Jupiter quality is reflected here. But I think we're pretty close on this chart.
Well, yeah, I do. And if you look at that Jupiter, it's involved in a grand crosshair with Saturn in Scorpio retrograde, with Neptune in Leo, and the Sun in Taurus. And I'm telling you, I can see that tension playing out within his being, where he sees what's going on in the world and he wants to use his voice. He has a special role. He sees deeper than the typical person, and he just knows how to convey it. And then you've got Mars in Pisces, which is, Kristin, what you often talk about. Animals have no agenda, and he can see right into that. And you can just see that he has a real clear desire to share this with the world for the benefit and the protection of the world and getting people engaged, just as you were saying.
You know, it's incredible. This morning, I found a YouTube video where famous people were interviewing him. And one of them asked, David Beckham, I think was one of them, and then Eilish, what's her first name, that musician?
Billie Eilish.
Billie Eilish asked him this: how do you deal with what you see? She just wanted to know, since he's like really immersed himself and all of that just makes you ill if you're a lover of nature. You know, how do you live with that? And how do you feel about it? He said, it's an energy of desperation. And this desperation, this desperate energy of knowing that things need to change and wanting to save Mars and Pisces, wanting to save the animals, save the wildlife, save nature, and not being able to feel like you can do anything about it. Of course, he's doing everything that he can do using his own fingerprint to try and be a messenger of what's actually happening in the world. And it is this experience of his going all over the world and seeing all of these landscapes and walks of life that really, I mean, maybe far before this, he became an agnostic. And he even said, it never occurred to me to believe in God. And the reason why he's a third stage individuated soul is because in West Africa, he was talking about seeing this little boy on the banks with this worm boring a hole in his eyeball, you know, kind of like this, where is this merciful God, with this worm, part of nature, right, boring a hole in this little boy's eyeball. He was so disillusioned with that Neptune forming that grand cross here that we just talked about, opposing Jupiter, squaring Saturn. Where's God in the eyes of this child now, right? And so that's where he is on his journey. And yet he's absolutely a very powerful messenger on so many fronts and so many levels. So His soul, I feel, is so pure in his intention to really get the word out and to educate people. And he does it with such a way and a grace that just draws you in. So
very thankful for his life.
me too. And Linda Johnson reminded us that, gosh, with 9th house Sagittarius and Jupiter, it is all about being able to have a sense of humor. And the Dalai Lama sure has one. He's an optimistic soul, and even in the face of all that's happening in this on this planet as well. And you know, he talks here, I'll choose to be optimistic, it feels better. I mean, a classic, looking at the glass half full instead of half empty. But I'm reminded with all these quotes too of something that Jeffrey Wolfe Green, the founder of Evolutionary Astrology, used to say. He's got a strong Scorpio Sagittarian little stellium happening, and he said, if I wasn't a Sag, I'd be dead by now. So Sagittarius has a lot to do with either being at the right place at the right time, or feeling like you have a guardian angel at times, to being able to make light of something when you want to die in the middle of it, right? Like it's something so painful that you have to find humor in it. And so there is something life-saving about that Sagittarian quality. There really is something illuminating, something uplifting. And you know, if you're around that energy, that you just can't get enough of it. It's just so contagious when it's in your midst, or when you're feeling it within yourself, and maybe you are having a Jupiter transit that just feels good. It feels lighter. It allows you to sort of just look at a bigger picture perspective of things. And so I wanted to add to that, every evolved soul, whether it's the Dalai Lama, Sri Yukteswar, Jeffrey Wolfe Green, whoever it might be, they all have one thing in common. And Yogananda, great sense of humor. All of them have a sense of humor. And you have to have that in order to handle evolution. So,
can I just say one thing? The Dalai Lama has come out to Salt Lake City a few times, and I've been able to see him speak twice. And in addition to just his beautiful sense of humor, he has this giggle. When he giggles, you giggle. And actually, Jeffrey Wolfe Green has the same thing, and it's healing. It's just so healing. So we're very thankful for these souls that bring levity to our intense world.
Yeah, and the Sagittarian souls will teach you that laughter is medicine, right?
For sure.
The best kind. All right, so we're going to bring in our first guest today, and we're going to start with Deva Green, the daughter of Jeffrey Wolfe Green, and she's going to talk about Pluto and the 9th house, or Sagittarius. And Deva, let me know what other planet too. Welcome back, Deva.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me back. Yes, today Pluto in the 9th, or Sagittarius, and Neptune in Sagittarius, or the 9th, of course, expressed naturally in the spirit of Sagittarius. So yeah, to start, I would also like to just share in terms of the recovery of the Damon Archetype and how central that is to the 9th house, especially in Pluto, because when we have Pluto in any given house or sign, it's going to magnetize, or it's going to emphasize the house and sign. It's like bringing it up to a magnifying glass. The laser-like intensity of Pluto, Scorpio 9th house archetype. So when we have Pluto in the 9th house, it's really emphasizing that transition from the death, metamorphosis, and rebirth that comes through quite often the experience of loss. And as you say, Kristin and Stacie, as you've been sharing about this archetype and its natural expression, we reach Sagittarius, and in its best expression, in its natural expression, there's a sense of the cup emptying, or there's a sense of opportunity that the Sag can now see from that loss. So there's a perspective change. There's often a shift of interpretation relative to how we're sitting with that loss. It loses that scorpionic sting and we're looking at a horizon in front of us now. We're looking at an opportunity that we did not have before had we not allowed ourselves to purge, or not allowed ourselves to release and to rebirth in the way that Scorpio asked us, or the intention of Pluto is to shed those skins, or to metamorphose. So typically when we experience Jupiter transits, Pluto in the ninth, it's not just a gain, or it's not just, oh, sudden opportunities. It's that the soul has been willing to let go of certain areas that creates expansion, that's drawing in those opportunities. And so the psychology of levity, lightness, so often, especially with my dad, laughing at the absurdity of life itself.
Yes.
And you can't, I mean, you can't get any better than that, because when you start to reframe things, or when you start to develop that silver lining, and let's look to the next horizon, or let's look at everything that we're gaining. It's like the ability to recover, or the ability to really tune into and access that Damon archetype, can really magnetize, because it's like saying so often from Scorpio to Sag, I've got nothing left to lose. So,
Right.
so that means that here comes the ability, or I'm not gonna make any other choice other than to align with my personal truth, because there is always it sounds kind of Capricorn, but there's a release, and there's a beauty, and there's also consequences. That speaking the truth and aligning with personal truth, that every choice has a consequence. And with Jupiter, it's the beauty and the release. I mean, how often with our spiritual teachers who are just these incredible incarnations of wisdom. I mean, Yukteswar, he's an incarnation of wisdom. I don't know any other way to express it other than that his truths are absolutely unshackling. And that when you stick with it, when you allow yourself to go through those slings of absolutely feeling like you're dying in the truth, that what then happens for you is beyond any way for me to give voice to, beyond saying recovery, recovery, recovery. It's just, everything comes from that. And as often people who were in Yukteswar's presence, I mean, even Yogananda would make a humorous joke. He would say, I dare say you would be the most sought after guru in all of India if your speech weren't so candid. So many would just flee from the slings of truth that were prevalent to his nature. And of course they weren't intended to hurt all. The only intention behind it was to dislodge those parts of the ego that can so firmly set in. But when we're looking at this ninth house archetype, it's really essentially rebuilding, or really from what I understand, it's the joy that comes after the sling of Scorpio, and aligning with one's personal truth. Because when you're reaching that ninth house, it almost becomes a sense of freedom, linked with the Aries archetype, that the freedom comes through speaking the truth, through recovery, and one's alignment with one's personal truth in a way that expresses its raw nature, or expresses the inherent truth of who we are as souls, our individual truth, and being able to commit to that, or being able to stick with that, whether it's a truth that we are facing about ourselves. As Jesus would say, speak the truth, speak the truth, and you will be set free. So it's all about interpretation and seeing these things as more opportunities to recover our natural nature, rather than approaching it from, oh my God, what am I going to have to face? Because so often there's this juxtaposition, and the ninth house archetype is at its best when it can heal with humor, when it can, it's like unshackling intuition. That can be the best expression too. And that, look at Jesus, for example. He has the Pluto and Scorpio, or Pluto and Virgo retrograde in the ninth house. And looking at that, there's, just starting with that symbol, there's an expression of a teacher of natural law that's coming through the shedding of the false teachings or the false beliefs of subservience, of dominant submission, of essentially that we are all, inside of us all lies the kingdom of God. And that it's really about promoting the natural truth of accessing this from direct intuition, directly from in ourselves, that it doesn't require an intermediary, that you can essentially recover this through your own natural fingerprint, whether that be through something as simple as communing with nature, which can be so heart and central to the Damon archetype. But it's looking at the Pisces in the third house too, that it's something essentially universal, that it's something that we can all access, that we were all created by the source. When my eye is single, I am full of light, meaning I am merging with that source from within myself. I'm accessing, I'm recovering inner knowledge. And that's so essential to the ninth house archetype, the difference between learned information, beliefs. We can be sitting anywhere, listening to a teacher, listening to somebody on a pulpit, listening to somebody who's teaching at a university. But there's a real difference between those kinds of teachings and actual knowledge, or direct knowledge, which comes from this recovery process that comes through that accessing of natural law. And natural law are truths that are self-evident, that the truth inherently exists, and we don't necessarily need a belief system to explain it, to know the truth. And Yukteswar, having Pluto and Taurus in the ninth house, he was adamant about any truth or any teaching being given a personal application or a personal meaning, not something that you absorbed. You can read how many spiritual scriptures, how many spiritual stanzas, and what direct inner knowledge have you actually gained from this? Versus memorization, looking at the South Node in the third in Scorpio, that he was advocating direct knowledge, with Pluto being in the ninth house, or he would frequently ask how these memorized stanzas, what meaning do these have in your life? How have you made these your own? And I remember a story that to present him, or to convey in the best way I know how, as an incarnation of wisdom, and how it wasn't easy, right? I mean, the reward is when you stuck with it, because you would see the gift that was then being given to you, but it didn't happen right away. It was the Taurus ninth house, stubborn. I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna listen, I'm gonna start to see these so-called rocks as gold that are now coming my way. And as an example of that, I remember a story of his, and a student came, and they thought of themselves as this great learned person of, I've memorized the Gita and I know this stanza and that stanza, and nobody can outquote me, or I can come and I can express how much I know. And so they're listening for, I think, a good chunk of time, him and Yogananda and the other disciples. And I think after 30 minutes he said, have you concluded? He said, okay. So from that, I would like to know, what direct inner knowledge, how have you made these your own? In what ways have these sanctuary truths been made meaningful in your life? And there was absolutely no response on the other end. And then you just sort of said, please get a sponge and start scrubbing the walls from these tainted words. And the levity of Sag, I mean, it's being able to convey that the truth can only be accessed in a way that arrives at accessing that from direct inner knowledge. And in many ways, he would express this through his stories of being young, or encouraging people to really look at their own life and what lessons can you learn. Very ninth house, like each experience as teaching you something from that direct knowledge, rather than, again, from memorization or from belief. And he is evolutionary astrology was gifted from him. It's comes or originates from him, and was given to my dad, Jeffrey Wolfe Green, in a dream. Another ninth house Pluto. How perfect. And absolutely, like all three, teacher of natural law. In his natal chart, he's got Pluto in the ninth house, with Saturn balsamic in the ninth. And from what I understand, this is a soul who just absolutely never conformed. Never. I mean, it wasn't something that was natural for him, and something that has led to his ability to essentially become his own inner teacher, which I just, the capacity, the intuitive capacity is just absolutely emphasized almost every place in the chart. Pluto, Saturn, ninth house, South Node, first house, Sun, South Node, Mars in the second, essentially encapsulating himself in nature, and able to recover, or able to access these natural truths from within himself in such a way that's very ninth house, always had an attitude of, this is who I am, you can take it or leave it. And that was that. I mean, looking at the Scorpio energy in the chart, from his teachings, he always said, always, in almost every exchange I've seen when it had the potential to become contentious or confrontational, his direct words were, I am not here to convince and convert. I am not here to try and convince you of anything. It's evolutionary astrology is simply about validating your own life experience. And how many of us have had the experience of listening to him talk, and you just find that your mouth is hanging open and your head is nodding? You might not always know the full dimension of why, but your soul is going, yes. This speaks to the heart of those with the ninth house, and those who can receive the truth will resonate when the truth is spoken. I remember him sharing for a part of his life to heal from the experiences of being in war and other traumatic experiences. He lived with wolves. He had a period where he lived with wolves, and he was able to directly perceive from them their spirit. And that also helped with Moon in the fourth house to heal his own self-image, right at home, Damon soul, right at home with nature, and felt much more comfortable in the presence of also those like Native Americans. So the natural peoples. So the point in bringing that up is that absolutely he always encouraged inner recovery of this truth, not a reliance on a teacher, and always spoke or always advocated the truth that a true teacher never points the way to him or herself, but points the way home. And that's how you can know the difference between who's who. and this coming through evolutionary astrology. So seeing the parallels with Jesus, with Yukteswar, with Jeffrey Wolfe Green, my dad, they all have Pluto in the 9th house. And yet the ways that, or their approach, or the ways that they were communicating, or the ways that they were teaching natural law, were, in my point of view, of course, reflective of their authentic nature, their truth. That's very 9th house. That for Jesus, he was speaking for all, looking at the Pisces in the 3rd house, with Pluto being in Virgo in the 9th. From my point of view, it was to really culminate that dominant submission, or to really culminate the those who were subjugated, or those who were persecuted, that again the kingdom of God lives inside all, and trying to speak to the heart of that natural truth. As Stacie was sharing, that speaks to the dynamic of not subservient and not dominant, but equal. Looking at the Pisces in the 3rd, it would be the universality of this message. And that this again existed in all souls. So not to exclude, or his reaching out to those who had been persecuted or cast aside, eating with those who had been shunned, to reveal, or to convey that fundamental truth that was much needed for that time. With Yukteswar, it was very much making these often what could seem abstract, or again principles that were memorized so often, really trying to make, or really communicating the need to make these practical daily exercises that you do to really tune into these things on your own. That 2nd house, or the Taurus emphasis, is very self-reliant, or can really focus on what can you do to make these your own. He's the source of evolutionary astrology. The ruler of that North Node is Venus in the 11th house. So I mean, just absolutely being able to expand our vision of astrology. Of course, it's not based on fate. I love his quote of, if a fool read the stars as a script rather than a scroll, what can be done? So, it's not. It's not. Your chart does not determine your fate. No. But really speaking to the heart of these fundamental truths, and how to really make these accessible. In one's daily life, in one's daily practice, an incarnation of wisdom in ways to really utilize, or to really develop these skills. And with Jeffrey Wolfe Green, the way I've experienced it, and the way I've experienced the teachings, it's so in line. Of course, it's a beautiful expression of his thumbprint, in that it's very much the recovery of your actual nature, the recovery of your inner truth through, he's got Mars in the 2nd, so it's also very much very similar to Yukteswar in doing this on your own. Don't rely on this old form. You can do this. Everybody has the ability to recover, or to align with what's most natural for them. And so often it makes me think of that lone wolf who's able to absolutely, no matter under any conditions, I am who I am, and I will remain who I am. Can see that as the Mars in the 2nd with Sag, and also the 1st house energy. So a warrior spirit for sure. He would always say that, come what may. Come what may. And all of this being expressed through the natural laws of evolutionary astrology, that again, these aren't things that are created, or these aren't things that are new. It's that they're being expressed in a new way. It's that these ancient truths, or these natural principles that will be around whether human beings or not, are being now expressed through the vehicle of astrology. How to know your soul, how to tune into your thumbprint, how to access the part of yourself that's absolutely natural, that's unconditioned by anything. So it facilitates the process of stripping yourself down to the bone, very Pluto-like, in order to access or in order to recover that unrepressed, that unrepressed and untamed wild part so often, or the part that's unrepressed, the part that's absolutely authentic and natural to yourself. And again, these principles are not new. It's that they are based upon ancient truths or natural laws that in one way or another have been passed down through these teachers of natural laws, and it's aligning with, or it's coming back into recovery and interpreting or integrating our life around us from that prism. Ninth house also being how we interpret life. Also understanding our nature in a way that helps set us free. When we interpret things in certain ways, then we can set ourselves free as well. So to kind of close that, it's not that it's extraction or pumping out something external from the outside, which I think so many of us can fall into, but it's about really tuning into and really recovering our intuition, our natural truths, and in alignment with natural laws. And one of my favorite sayings that I think really, in summary, encapsulates the ninth house is, our best teacher is the wisdom of our own hearts. So that's my talk for today.
Thank you so much, Deva. Oh, I enjoyed every second of that. Oh, these teachers, everyone that you've just touched upon are, for me, my world. And I was raised as a Mormon here in Utah, the great state of Utah. And it didn't make sense to me because people were judging each other. You touched upon memorization, like memorizing scriptures, but yet they would judge each other. And then in my experience, I was so limited. I could not find God where I was finding it, if you know what I mean. And I had to make a break, and I started studying astrology. I started out with just a kind of an unknown mentor back in Santa Fe, and his teachings weren't sticking. And then I came across Jeffrey Wolfe Green, and I could not believe it. I don't know why I bought that book, because I'm generally not a big reader, and it was a lot of words and not a lot of images. But I was just, I need this book. And I took it home and started reading it, and it didn't take long. I was like, okay, this is what I want to know. And there was a page at the end of the book that said, hey, if you're interested in studying evolutionary astrology, write to this address, and we'll whatever. And so I immediately got out my envelopes and a letter. I wrote a fancy letter. I was even careful with my font. It was just really special. And I went to pull out a stamp, and the only stamp I had, it had no adhesive on it. And so I got out some super glue to help affix it to the envelope. And when I pressed it, that super glue didn't go on the stamp. It went right in my left eye. And my eye was glued shut.
Oh my gosh.
So I had to go to the emergency room. And do you know what I did? This is not a lie. This is serious. I took both of my Pluto books with me to the ER, And I was sitting on this stainless steel emergency room table and I was reading with one eye. I could not get away from it. And, you know, and then as the universe would have it, I ended up being able to be present in the last school that he taught, and I was able to sit at his feet. And I cannot express, it'll take years for me to express how special and pivotal that I'm going to call it a reunion because I've known him before. I just know that. And but all the truth that I had been seeking and the religions that had been failing me, it was all making sense, and I was so thirsty, and I took it in. And so I'm just so grateful for your dad, and I'm so grateful for you for carrying it on. And so I just needed to share that.
Thank you, Stacie, for sharing that.
Thank you, Stacie.
And Deva too. That was just incredible. It was just like food for the soul. And it's interesting, in evolutionary astrology, we look at repeating themes in transits, look at them in charts, and in these three cases, they all three have Pisces moon, they all have 9th house Plutos, they all have Pisces moon. I think Eucostar and Jesus have a 9th house Mars, but Jeffrey has Mars and Sag. And then this Neptune connection, and always in Evolved Souls, you will see a prominent Neptune. So you've got Neptune on the moon for Eucostar, you have Neptune on the south node for Jesus, and for Jeffrey, you've obviously got the Pisces moon, but he's got a south node in the 11th house. So it's the Neptune is, not the south node's not the 11th, the Neptune is in the 11th house, trining the north node exactly. So there's all these similar themes, not just the 9th house Pluto, but really prominent planets. And it does feel very much like the three of them are cut from the same cloth, you know, part of the same lineage, same teachings, many paths lead to one, you know, this actual look at spirituality, natural laws. And so it was a beautiful example of its own kind of trinity here. Obviously, Eucostar gifting this work to Jeffrey to be the caretaker, and as he called himself the errand boy for this work here. I'm nothing but an errand boy, so. Anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you so much for bringing up the Neptune, and also Stacie, the most natural way to spiritualize, how things can either be delusive, and when you hear the truth, that Neptune in the 9th, or in these three cases, universal truths coming through these natural laws, illumination. Things that were confusing now make sense in a way that will be true for all time. And Stacie, such as yourself and other Damon souls, you just awaken in ways that you can't put words to. So Neptune in the 9th, or that emphasize Neptune. Thank you. Exactly.
And one last little quote. The truth is simple. It's just not always easy.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, Stace, let's introduce our next speaker.
All right. So next we have Simon Vorster from the UK. Very excited.
From Sweden.
Oh, I'm sorry, from Sweden. I'm so sorry, Simon. Anyway, we are very excited to hear from you. So go ahead.
Thanks very much, Stacie, Kristin. It's always an honor to be able to share EA with all of you guys. And Deva, that was just amazing. I loved what you shared. And I think all of your stories so far have just kind of got a little place in my heart of why this material is so meaningful to me, you know. So I'm going to talk about Jupiter and Uranus. These are the two planets I'm going to talk about today. And I actually have both of them on my south node, and they're in a conjunction with each other in Sagittarius. So I love this energy. The archetype of Jupiter Sagittarius has to do with the way that we develop an orientation towards life. We need a organizing system that allows us to make sense of reality. So we create a philosophical overlay, a cosmology, an umbrella, as it were. And this philosophical overlay allows us to make sense of reality. So we ask these questions about life, and it is through this philosophical overlay that we actually be able to answer it. This is kind of through the Gemini function, where we get to ask the question, and as we explore Jupiter, we expand our horizons. So this natural function of exploring and expanding something, making something bigger. And as you said earlier, this is about looking over the horizon, the potential, what lies beyond that period of time when we were in Scorpio and everything was just very transformative. We want to come out into the fire sign, into the expansion of the mutable energy with Jupiter, and we want to shoot the arrow, right? We want to shoot it into this distance. We want to see what's the possibility, what's the potential, what lies beyond that. So that Jupiter placement for us contributes to where there's a sense of expansion that is potential for within all of ourselves. And it is that exploration within our lives that leads us on the journey to see life as it is for us individually. And that's something that's really interesting, because in a consensus state, the organizing principle for people to have a philosophical overlay is going to be something along the lines of religion. And you can see why you were talking earlier about being raised in a Mormon community and everybody was kind of judging each other, that it seems natural that within a we philosophy, there's one truth within that everybody has to align with. That sense of individuation actually gets squished out, and everybody needs to conform to one truth, but our natural nature is not that way. So we find ourselves transgressing the lines of our own individuation, and we find ourselves saying, oh, that person sinned, that person hasn't done that correctly, that person has aligned with that our truth. And you can see how within consensus philosophical truth, it gives a sense of security, right? And that's something that's really strongly associated with the archetype of Jupiter and Sagittarius, is this orientation towards our faith, having security deeply entwined in it. Our sense of, I must be right, because if I'm not right, and what does that feel like? That brings up a sense of emotion to the surface, and that can be very uncomfortable, right? Natural square to Virgo. What happens if I'm humiliated? Or what happens if I was, deceptive in my truth? So, our security is deeply linked with our sense of faith and this overarching cosmological truth that guides us within our life. If we're having experiences, and this definitely can happen with Jupiter transit your 9th house in a solar return or a transit. I remember my experience of having Jupiter transit my 9th house. I was like, okay, cool, everything's going to expand. But it didn't come through that lens. It came through, oh, you thought you knew things. There's a whole bunch of things here that you can explore a little bit more. And how do you feel comfortable with that? It's like, oh, wow, actually, no. There's still more to explore. There's still more to learn. And what I thought I knew actually is not a lot in comparison to what I was going to learn. So this organizing principle of expansion and our sense of security linked with it can actually lead us to states of fanatical behavior. That's why we can see in organized religious states that, and this is something that I think would be also interesting to observe, as the Pluto and Sagittarius generation coming into this lifetime and noticing this very deep unconscious rejection towards religion as a sense of maybe past lifetimes in which they have been part of these religious wars and realize that they've fought for this faith. That their entire identity was linked with the faith itself, with the religion itself, and the moral and the ethical code that was associated with it, morals, ethics, Jupiter. They were out of whack. They weren't in alignment with true integrity. Resistance towards religion being something that initiates us into war, and we justify, we convince ourselves, right? With Jupiter as well, this archetype of convincing. We can experience trying to convince somebody that we're right, or that religion itself says, well, this is the only way to find God. And so this is the only way that you can do something. There is no other way. And if our sense of ego structure feels insecure, and we find an attachment to this ideology. And that's something that's very prominent right now in the world that we live in, especially with this transiting South Node in Sagittarius right now. We're going to become very aware of how our sense of identity can be deeply linked to ideologies. And we can actually live in alignment with an ideology that might not even actually reflect our inner truth, but we don't know what our inner truth is because our sense of self maybe is not developed in a way. So aligning with truths, aligning with religions, aligning with cosmological overlays through being sort of told that this is the way forward. This is how it is. We're being convinced in some way. We can just kind of align to a process. So Jupiter can be very much that process where we can be convinced of something, or we want to convince as well. And again, it's all roots down to that inconjunct between Sag and Cancer, which is that sense of security. Just like politicians, great example. You know, every politician will go on two things. Here's the value and here's the security I'm offering you, right? And so think about the convincing part, and then the natural inconjunct between Sagittarius and Taurus. This is the values, this is the survival, and here's your security, or this is what we're going to do. And then you go, yeah, this is what I need to align with. So there's a natural transition that takes place. And speaking of natural transitions, making a natural transition into the Uranus and Sagittarius expression, from a state of not knowing your individuation or your sense of self, or not exploring your own inner truth, or not knowing what that inner sense of truth is for you, you can find yourself actually aligning with truths that are not actually a representation of you whatsoever. And as we move into an Aquarius type of way, we find that the truth for our existence is actually the one that we walk, that the meaning of our life is not found outside of ourselves, that as we experience life, we begin to see that actually there's an individuation process taking place for us, and that what we correct for one person or natural for one person might be completely incorrect for another. And this is this natural transition that I think takes place as we individuate from the consensus and then eventually into spiritual state. We find that there is a universal truth, that we're all here experiencing this co-creation, and that there is intense diversity that takes place. And each path has its own unique experience and its own unique meaning and its own unique purpose. And this is, from my point of view, at least in terms of how I understand the Sagittarius nature, is to progressively align with what is that meaning for you, what is your truth, and what have you come to share and experience. That's why I think you were amplifying a lot, Deva, with Jeffrey's work and his chart. So Uranus in Sagittarius, Uranus is the archetype that wants to individuate, right? This is the archetype that we're here to decondition. So generally speaking, with Uranus in Sagittarius, or the ninth house, there's a tendency to come across an expression of truth and really, really struggle to actually have a very convincing conversation with somebody that has Uranus in the ninth house, so Sag, because to them, the Uranian energy, the Uranian impulses inside of themselves doesn't want to conform to a collective truth, a collective ideology. They're learning to individuate from that and question things and ask, what is reality relative to their own direct experience of life? And that's something that I think is very important to understand about the Sagittarius, and especially Uranus. What I've observed, Uranus in the ninth house, is direct experience, you know, as you see it for yourself, as opposed to just believing in it. Like you talked about earlier with Ryuka Shah, sharing about just reciting information, as opposed to actually having a direct experience and knowing the truth somatically within the self. So as I close off today over here, just thoughts on Uranus in the ninth, or Uranus in Sagittarius, is here we are learning to completely objectify the nature of what is reality and truth for ourselves, and to begin to question the nature of what type of guiding principles we use, or what type of faith or philosophy you may have grown up in, that's then you needed to break out of. So the soul will literally create an experience in which there might have been a parent that had a faith that you needed to believe in, or that was very devoted to it themselves, and you questioned it a lot. And you were experiencing the nature of coming out of and breaking out of the Saturn mold of that outdated belief system. So yeah, that's my conversation today. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Simon. Oh, I love that. And it reminded me of this story. I was kind of giggling inside when you were talking about this convince and convert. You do have a few planets in Sag. But since Stacie, when I first found this work, I didn't have a emergency room experience, thank God. But, you know, earlier I was talking about that Sag quality, you know the truth when you hear it. And when I first heard Jeffrey lecturing, I had been to several lectures before hearing him that weekend at a conference. And I was exhausted. I felt like I was exhausted because my left brain was experiencing this mental gymnastics of trying to take in information. And it wasn't feeding any other part of me. And it was finally on Easter Sunday when I went in and I listened to him speak for the first time in a packed house early on a Sunday. You could hear a pin drop. And everything that he said was spoken in such a holistic way, right? A way that reached every cell, your emotions. It was an emotional experience, actually. And, you know, I realized that weekend that I'd just been avoiding this moment because I knew, you know, when you hear the truth, you know, it's not always easy. It's simple, but it's not always easy. I was going to be walking through a door that I could not unwalk through again. But it was so refreshing to not have to try to do anything. I was just in such a receptive place. That's what this work does. It just reaches you so deeply and so directly. And I did get excited after that and want to tell everybody about it. I could not tamper my excitement. I think I ran into some roadblocks with people that weren't ready to hear what I had to say about reincarnation in particular. Right? It threatens a lot of people's security, Simon, as you were mentioning. It really does. It's challenging when we come to believe something that we find out isn't true. It does create an incredible the disillusionment that comes with that for people is really a difficult one, a difficult dance. And so thank you for all of what you shared. And it's true that people do find the truth in their own way and in unique places with that Uranus and Sagittarius. We don't all have the same path there to find it. So it's our job to figure out a way to find the truth that we feel exists within ourselves. And it is linked with our fingerprint, for sure, what makes us who we are. All right. Stacie, any thoughts you wanted to share before we?
A really quick one. So yes, on the heels of everything that you just said, it being an individuating kind of process, truth is relative. Sagittarius is relativity. And so, you know, in the context of our own individual lives, we're interpreting phenomena and we're finding our connection to it. And it is different from everyone. And this is where belief systems can really limit, because it expects everyone to be in the same, you know, context. And it's just, life is just not that way. But there are universal truths. There are universal rights and wrongs that we can all intuit. And so.
And that we can all agree upon, right?
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's where natural laws come into place. And that's why this work, when you hear it, it's like, oh, of course, you know, that makes sense. It's natural. All right. Excellent, Simon. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you again.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Simon.
All right. Our next speaker today and teacher is Marty Dixon. Welcome, Marty.
Okay, I'm just going to go ahead here. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Okay, great. I want to talk a little bit about the Sagittarius and how it relates to the last matriarchy, as Jeffrey taught us. And I'm going to stop this picture here just for a moment. There we go. And Jeffrey taught us that we live, even in 1995, when he was talking about Pluto's entry into Sagittarius, which he really stressed. I think he was born to teach us that. He said that we live even then in a time of increased and increasing polarization, of very obvious extremes between belief systems, ways of life, ideologies, and cultures. And he says, what we need as a people and a community, and to feel secure and part of our tribe, and to be able to recognize each other, is some form of resilience. And so Sagittarius and the 9th house is resilience. It's learning to move and flow and recover from any obstacles in your way. And it also naturally sextiles the Aquarius-ruled 11th house. And the 11th house is how we liberate from conditioning. But they naturally, the 9th house and the 11th house naturally expedite each other. And we can stay on this slide for a little bit, Linda. Thank you very much. And so Jeffrey, in talking about the matriarchy, he said over 25,000 years ago, we lived in natural conditions during the age of Aquarius. And he said that those natural conditions were predicated by Pluto in Sagittarius, which actually sextiles, of course, the 11th Aquarian house. And so where we are right now is playing into the drama of Pluto entering, of course, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and now Capricorn, and on the verge within 3 years of Pluto entering Aquarius. So Pluto and Sagittarius and Jeffrey's lectures have really set us up for the time that we are in right now. He warned us in 1995 of religious fanaticism and all of its forms, and just look around you, just observe and correlate the illusion and delusional factions that you see all around you in all walks of life. Just look at it and think about it. It's all right there. I don't have to say any more. But he said this would increase. And here we are some, 25 years later, and it has done exactly that. Why? Because in order for everyone or any people to evolve past their current level of religious conditioning, they must come to extremes first in order to see, feel, experience, realize, and ultimately sense Sagittarius and know that the religious belief systems that they have been predicated upon were done out of fear and a teaching of original sin or original guilt. Just look around you. This has been my experience. I woke up when I started going to college, and I decided not to be religious anymore. I decided to follow my own calling, my own tune. I decided to just think for myself. And if you just look around you, has this been your observation as well? So during the last matriarchy that began during the age of Aquarius over 25,000 years ago, there were no belief systems. There was only natural law, a way of communing and living with nature in symbiosis and with the totality of all things and all creation. And these natural laws were self-evident and self-regulating. Jeffrey also mentioned the ongoing danger of increased planetary wildfires after Pluto entered Sagittarius. I can't talk fast enough. And this couples with the teachings of every one of my teachers from different cultures and backgrounds. He also cautioned against the culling effect that various viruses and bacteria would have on the human population between the Pluto in Sagittarius and the Pluto in Aquarius generations. Pluto in a generational sign is simply the part of the waking up of the astrological wheel, and he stressed that we must look at the natural progressions of things and Pluto through the signs and the ages, the turning of the ages as they come sequentially. But the main topic that Jeffrey stressed to myself and to others was the ability of the Sagittarian archetype to adapt and to relate and talk to all of nature, specifically the animals. This has been shared by all my Native American teachers. Jeffrey knew that, especially during the last stage of Aquarius, that it was possible for humans to commune with all plant and animal life, and that this communication was allowed between species. It was not only interrelational, it was interspecies. We understood the necessity and that communing with nature and the animals, humans understood the necessity for that for their own safety, resilience, and survival. And we can still learn this to this day. I'm not going to go into the history of the Dogon tribes of West Africa, but it's something that he talked about, a culture of over 7,000 years ago who actually knew their celestial origins and where they came from, and drew these inscriptions on petroglyphs on their caves. So now for our population here at this time, many, many man-made processes are coming to a head. Just look around you at all the structures and the institutions that we see crumbling around us. This is necessary for evolution to evolve. And Jeffrey said back in the late 90s that evolution will not proceed through collective enlightenment as many people would like to hope, but he said it will happen through near cataclysmic events, many of which we have already dodged. And it will happen through evolutionary necessity. We will come to a point as a human population where we will have no choice but to evolve. So because we're out of balance right now, and we have thrown or thrust nature so much out of balance by artificial means, we've come to a place where we must grow, learn, evolve, or perish. And nature, he reminded us, is fully conscious. It is much more conscious than we can even conceive of. She will do whatever is necessary to maintain that balance. Okay, and this chart is the 9th house of Sagittarius in relation to the 0 Aries point. So if you look at the 9th house of Sagittarius, and you look at the 0 Aries point in the natural zodiac, which represents the first house of Aries, the first house of Aries is the reintroduction of our spirit self into a body. It is the fire sign of new soul in a body and new life and a new reincarnation. The 9th house, Sagittarius, is the most transcendental expression of the fire signs. It is the desire for the soul to expand spiritually, having experienced the infusion of soul into the body as expressed through the preceding sign of Scorpio. So Sagittarius now shows us how spirit may soar beyond physical limitations and seek to link with Creator, 9th house. And it naturally squares the 12th house of Pisces, which is a wake-up call to the desire to merge with Source and all that is. So the 9th house, Sagittarius, in the natural zodiac, very much instigates and inspires us to the spiritualization process, Pisces. It also engages us with something higher and brighter and bigger than ourselves, which is a concept that we may not have ever pondered before, and helps us to understand and know what we know. The wisdom of Sagittarius is a process of enlightenment that comes to us like light falling upon the frontal lobe, and enters into our consciousness and fills us with the direct knowingness and the understanding of the totality of all things. So moving right along here, I want to talk about Mercury. And okay, we want to talk about Mercury. Thank you, Linda. So when you look at the 9th house, and it's naturally opposed to the 3rd house, the 9th house of Sagittarius and the 3rd house of Mercury, or Gemini, excuse me, you see opposition. What this is doing is accelerating our learning processes, because with 9th house, if you think that you know a lot and you've gained a lot of knowledge and experience and direct knowledge, so to speak, and wisdom, the 3rd house that directly opposes Sagittarius is going to help us to learn to seek out new information, new thoughts and ideas, and continually open the gates of the mind. So the two back and forth really heighten the mental learning process, and they keep the mind open, and they work together in tandem. They help us to solve problems and help us to see spiritually through spiritual eyes, and to see conceptually and image-based information and symbolic information that we might have missed before, simply by opening the mind again, taking in new information and processing and disseminating that information to yourself and to others. Mercury in Sagittarius, or the 9th house, can tell us how we are learning. And what we are learning in the process as our life is unfolding and happening. It can help us understand how the wheels of our brain work. When we look at Mercury, we're looking at left brain, what we would call conducive, rational, linear thinking. But the influence that Sagittarius has on Mercury is to open up and try a new process and try to alter perhaps your wave, your brain waves, and enter into an altered state of meditation where you can actually osmose the nature and the natural environment that is all around you. So Sagittarius is teaching us how to rewire our brains and rewire how we think and get out of old habitual thought patterns. The two work together in tandem. Jeffrey taught us we have to learn to take the time to deal with the nature of the client sitting in front of us, to really listen, Sagittarius, because the very nature of their words that they've used will tell us what they need on a soul level and how they have constructed their reality. He went on to say that the very nature of a client's words when you're talking to them will help you understand what they think they need versus what they're actually asking you, and what they're actually asking on a soul or a symbolic level in a very Sagittarian intuitive sense. They might be pleading for help in a way that they're not really able to express, Gemini, and it's up to the good astrologer to interpret that in a Sagittarius sense, to really listen. So I'll stay on that slide for just a moment. And in every chart with Mercury, there is a thread to the next step. And Mercury not only shows us how to identify our natural world and identify the phenomenal world all around us, but it teaches us the sequencing of all events. It teaches us the threads of life that combine us to all people and all things. And in conclusion, I just want to say that I don't know if we'll get to the last chart or not, but in conclusion, I just want to say that okay, we won't get to the last chart. I'll go ahead and wrap this up. I just want to say that with the progression of the generations, and Jeffrey's starting to talk about Sagittarius, the Pluto ingression to Sagittarius in 1995, we are all woven together. We can see through progressive Pluto generations how evolution evolves and grows, and how we're all woven together, and how we all affect each other's little lives down here on Earth. And Sagittarius helps us to adapt, be quick on our feet, ever mutable, ever changing. It understands the ability of the animals to adapt and grow. Oh, thank you, Linda. I don't know how much time I have, but this is a very good example of the 9th house affecting the 3rd house and back and forth. The 3rd house is new information. The 9th house is how that information is osmosed and garnered and gained into the individual soul. And then once they become perhaps wizened and filled with knowledge and are disseminating their information, their 3rd house again brings in new information and new ideas to help you reinterpret that information. So this 9th and 3rd house very much accelerate the mental learning process. And this is actually the chart of, if you get the name right, give me just a moment. John Anthony Gillis, who some of you might know as a musician by the name of Jack White. And Jack White became famous with his his subsidiary role in the film Cold Mountain, where he played a wandering troubadour and told stories about the Civil War process. I do believe that that was past life stuff for him. He very much is a very intuitive person, and you can see the Sagittarian influence him. Sun in the 10th house, how he talked about history and old stories and told Civil War stories and played old vintage instruments and helped carry on the culture and the language and the stories that were passed down to us during that time. But he also was a purist and struggled with stage fright. And to be very quick, I would just say that it was during the playing guitar and singing process that he found that he could actually tell his stories in song form and that they would flow. And other than that, he was painfully shy and didn't want to talk. He made the statement that you can interview me, but I might not tell you the truth, and please don't ask me any questions. So there's a good example of somebody learning very quickly through the 9th and the 3rd house, new information feeding what you already know, helping you to reinterpret it and reinterpret it to others in another form, a conceptual, musical form that is helping us to stimulate the higher mind. And I just want to conclude with my talk with saying that Jeffrey did teach us about the teaching of Pluto through the successive generations, and he started in 1995 speaking specifically about Pluto and Sagittarius. Pluto and Sagittarius fuels our lives right now as we approach the Aquarian point, and we have to learn to develop a strong sense of Sagittarian humor, a sense of the macabre, a sense of the bizarre. We have to adapt to ever-shifting, mutable, polarized situations. Sagittarius learn to think quick like the animals. And also, he said, Pluto evolution happens slowly, but at times it can be cataclysmic. He pointed out that we have no doubt dodged many potential cataclysms in our lifetimes. In the days to come, he said, you will begin to see more and more like the animals with spiritual eyes. If you tune into them and listen, you will begin to see the progressive elimination of man-made law and the progressive proliferation of natural law, so that the totality of nature, Gaia, can return to a state of balance. My point is, we had a world like that before.
Thank you so much, Marty. That was riveting. I love that quote, we have no choice but to evolve. And when you take the polarity of Gemini and Sagittarius, Mercury and Jupiter, this is a process of integrating the left and the right brain. So it's not just a process of taking information and forming opinions about it. It's also a process of integrating it into our daily lives and interpreting our lives through that information. And it's an ongoing process. It never dies. It just goes on. And that's the main thing that I took away. I think that's really powerful. Mm-hmm. So what about you, Kristin?
I loved how you started in talking about the matriarchy and how long ago that was and where you came full circle. That's how Jeffrey used to teach, tying it all together and coming full circle. And girl, did you save all your notes from the 90s? I mean, you amaze me, because it's such a treat and a gift to hear these quotes, like, long before I ever met him. And to be able, it just, it could only be him talking. And it's so nice for you to be able to pull those passages from the annals of history and for all of his predictions to be coming through, of course, coming true, whether it's the fires or the viruses or the religious fanaticism. I mean, it's just incredible. So what a treat. The last thing that you said, we're talking about spiritual eyes like the animals, and ultimately experiencing a world that we've had before. It's not a new world, it's trying to get back to where we were, going back to our matriarchal roots with the north nodes of all the planets, those outer planets in Cancer. So, and thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
It was wonderful.
Okay, Stace, let's introduce the next.
We have Ari Moshe Wolfe ready to talk to us right now.
A Sagittarius boy.
He's been in different landscapes, I've noticed. So here we are. Welcome, Ari.
Hi.
I have
What
to say
a
we
fun day it's been. Oh my God.
we have four, I have to say, we have 4 speakers today that are Sagittarians.
I was noticing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love how EA is a beautiful combo of Sag and Scorpio.
It is true.
It's a funny Sag story. So I was at Dylan's 7th birthday, and we're at a park, and I was kind of keeping track of the talks, and I knew I was after Deva, so I went to like a palm tree, and then I saw that, you know, Marty was after Deva, so I went, or Simon, you know, then I went to the forest near the park, and I took my shoes off, and I'm all ready, and then Marty comes on, and so I get my shoes on, and I help clean up the birthday party. We get back in the car. Now we're home. So it just felt like a really fun adventure.
Sounds like
I just got now onto the couch. Let me just take a moment to tune in. Okay. So we're looking at Mars in Sagittarius, or the 9th house. So Mars operates instinctively, and the function of Mars is always taking us to the next experience via the next choice, the next response. And how we respond is really a function ultimately of what we're wanting. So we know that Mars really does point down to, on a deeper soul level, what it is we're desiring, what it is we're seeking to achieve here in this life. And so with Mars, we take full responsibility ultimately for how we are responding, how are we reacting, and the choices that we're making in life, because it really does demonstrate what it is that we're wanting. Thus, on one level, Mars in the 9th or Sag has a lot to do with becoming honest about our desires, becoming honest with ourselves about our reactions, about our choices. On one level, the Mars function can operate very instinctively here. It's a fire archetype, double fire archetype, where a soul will feel this, you know, calling to say something or just go somewhere and do something. And the journey with Mars in Sag, or the 9th house, is actually going deeper and deeper and deeper into what is the energy with which I am moving forward in life? What is the energy with which I am reacting and responding to what occurs? There can be a very strong terseness and bluntness with Mars in Sagittarius, and that can actually take the appearance of being honest. But there can be an aggression and a restlessness and an irritation in it, because the Mars and Sag function needs the freedom to keep on going. It needs the freedom to feel like they can live their truth, they can actualize their own desires, which can be, one, go where you need to go, be unrestrained, uncommitted, completely free, so that whatever needs to be experienced can be experienced. So if I need to get on a plane and go to India to meet this man that we're looking at right here, that I can do that. And thus, there can be a strong irritation and restlessness because of the feeling of being entrapped. The fear with Mars anywhere is not being able to make the choice that one needs. So due to that perception of not being free, not being able to live one's authentic life, follow the impulses that are relevant to one's soul's journey, there can be like a hastiness and a brusqueness in one's behavior. And so the process of getting more honest with oneself is really noticing, okay, this is the vibration that I'm carrying. And these are the choices that I'm making. I'm living a life where I'm paving a path of discovery and realization through a lot of quick movement, through a lot of hasteness, through a lot of bluntness. And so what we learn with Mars and Sag is, while we need to give ourselves absolute freedom and permission to actualize our desires, to act upon our intuitive impulses according to wherever we're being guided, wherever we're being directed, anywhere where there is a perception of being blocked or limited or prevented, or being an alien, being an outsider, I can't, act upon my desires here because I'm in the wrong culture, I'm in the wrong environment. Being aware of those inner dynamics are very important for Mars and Sagittarius, because that allows the soul to actually get to the root, get underneath the brusqueness, the hastiness, or the aggressiveness. And on the other end too, it's when there's an insecurity about one's path, where in Mars we are needing to have that freedom to act and do whatever we need to. In Sagittarius, it can be, I need to defend and prove my rightness. I need to defend and prove that I have the answers, my philosophical rightness, my teacher, my spiritual practice, my political ideology. And so to really be honest with ourselves, it's like, okay, you're winning the argument, you're making your points, you're convincing and converting other people, but the truth of what's happening isn't the thing you think that's happening. Like the path that you're actually creating, it's a path of defense, protectiveness, fighting, forcing, efforting, alienating. Like it's almost like living in this perpetual alienation where I'm always different. Other people have to believe me. Other people have to understand or agree with me, or I'm going to be reactive because I'm always perceiving that there's something that's going to be attacked or, you know, about my way of life. And there can be that experience with Mars and Sagittarius of needing to truly stand strongly in one's truth. Right? This is my path. This is my way. But the moment that becomes a war, the moment it becomes something to fight, we're actually not being completely honest with ourselves. And that's the thing with Sagittarius is I find truth and like what's true, what's sincere, what's authentic goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So you can say things that are true, but then it's like there's an even deeper level of truth than that. That it's not even about the saying, it's how you are in relationship to this moment. And that actually, as many of us have said, there's really no truth in our philosophies, in our ideologies. That's just there. It's just in the head. Truth is in the moment. Truth is always a direct experience. So on the other end of this, Mars and Sag, they can express as leaders, leading people through the forest, trailblazing a path, guided by their intuition and going where no one has gone before. And so the ability to be decisive and to say, I'm going to go. I'm going to be a leader and walk this path. And I don't know where it's going to take me, but I have to do it. I have to burn this karma. I have to take the step forward and follow this. And if I don't, I'm not engaging with my own vitality. I'm not engaging with the necessity to be a being of choice, a being that has a will that needs to use it. So it's so important with Mars and Sag that we are in touch with our truth. We're living authentically, but we are also uncovering any psychology of defensiveness, alienation, needing to prove, needing to attack. Remember, there was one experience where Mars was transiting on my Jupiter, and it was in my early years of learning astrology. So I was aware that Mars was on my Jupiter, and I was on an airplane, and there was a man sitting next to me. And I remember that we got into a conversation. I think it might have been about astrology, or it was something spiritual related. And I found myself getting super defensive of his like adamant, nope, that's not true. And that brought up a deep defense. I needed to prove the rightness of whatever I thought was true. And it's actually, you know, what we defend tells us what we think is important. Right? And it's like, it's more than that. What we defend is what we're investing our energy into. You know, like what we defend is what we're putting our will, we're putting our life force into it. And so it says like, this is worth living. This is worth fighting for. This is even worth dying for. And it's something to look at because I'm a student of non-defensiveness. I'm a student of, I practice questioning wherever the impulse or perception of attack arises and where I feel the need to defend. I'm very open to look at that. And there's something about the leadership, the valiance of walking one's path with courage, being true to oneself, not needing to prove it, not needing to get followers, not needing to be right, not needing to be understood. But Mars and Sag, I know that I have this walk that I need to walk. And I think that says a lot about a soul to have that internal relationship, that intuitive connection to their own path and to claim that entirely as their own. And I think when we're confident in ourselves, there isn't a need to prove or defend. Okay, Saturn. The issue with Saturn and Sag, and we can think about this with the semi-sextile between Sagittarius and Capricorn, is Sag inherently wants to grow through an openness to experience. and there needs to be a significant amount of freedom to be able to follow and connect with inner guidance. And even if you're following a teacher or a path, within that, the essence of any authentic teaching or teacher is going to point us to our own direct experience. Whereas in Capricorn, it's about the agreement, it's the rules, it's the constructs that we work with that makes life workable. And when it comes to spirituality, we have religions, or we have spiritual systems or spiritual practices and spiritual traditions that have existed throughout the ages. But we need to have a really clear point of wisdom here, where it's very easy with Saturn in Sagittarius, the ninth house, where we can repress our own intuitive function, our own capacity to intuitively connect and know the truth from within our own self, because we're following a construct that's been handed down to us. So this can be the authority of our teacher or even our parents, our culture that says this is the right way to be. These are the right things to believe. These are the outlooks to have. And so that pushes up against this intuitive function that's actually needing to expand into something that tastes very authentic. It needs to taste undeniably like, that Buddhist saying, just like the ocean tastes like salt, truth tastes like freedom. We need to have that authentic experience so it's irrefutable. We know that we're uncovering the truth. So the intention here, the work with Saturn and Sagittarius, on the one hand, is a deconditioning process of actually looking at where there might be shame, repression, guilt around one's own way, one's own nature. And thus there's a learning of speaking one's truth, being honest, expressing. And this could be as simple as, ninth house, Sag, you're speaking the truth about something that might make you alienated relative to your particular culture or religion. It's like, this is my sexuality, or these are my beliefs. That can be a very scary thing. Where Saturn, you'll get shamed, you'll get punished, you'll be judged. If you don't conform to the Torah, to the Bible, to whatever religious perspective. And so there can be that element of deconditioning and actually being able to access one's intuition. And in that process, it's accessing, connecting with, and realizing one's fear of trusting oneself. It's like, I can't do that. There's a time, I don't have this function, but there's a time when Saturn was in Gemini opposing all of my Sag planets. And during that time in my life, there was many experiences of doing things that were wrong according to the Orthodox Judaism that I grew up with. There was one experience, I was in Israel and it was Shabbos, so it's Friday night, and I grew up not turning lights on, not using any electricity on Shabbos. And so I'm in a room, and also I grew up not playing instruments on Shabbos. Traditionally in the Orthodox culture, you don't play any musical instruments on the Sabbath. And they're all these people that I'm spending the Shabbos with, they are playing musical instruments. And so I played a mandolin, and I had to actually inquire, is this wrong? And there was a feeling of this is wrong, but I had to really be honest with myself, like, where is the wrong? Like, I was trying to look for where is the wrong, like what, and I couldn't find an answer. Same thing with turning the light switch on. It felt wrong, but that feeling I was able to identify was just my conditioning. And so there was a clear attunement to, okay, I'm actually connecting with a sense of truthfulness. And this is natural, this is okay. But to do that, I actually had to connect with a deep sense of shame for doing something that I've held in my mind as wrong, punishable, breaking the Sabbath, violating a law. So one more expression with Saturn and Sagittarius, the ninth house, can then be the soul that has become very conditioned by a particular way of thinking, right? They could be a teacher. And there's a very crystallized idea. This is the truth. This is the path that I walked. This is the religious system. This is the spiritual system that I brought forth, that I've trained in. I've received it from my teachers, from their teachers for many, many years, all the way down to the first ape that ever existed. This is like the oldest spiritual practice. It's an ancient tradition. And to feel this false security in the fact that something is old. And I remember reading a book by Sri M. And Sri M is a teacher who also worked a lot with Babaji. he met Babaji, the same Babaji that Yogananda refers to. And he had a teacher that was a disciple of Babaji. And in this book, he described this particular encounter where he was arguing with his teacher about some of the rules and restrictions around teaching. Like, you have to be a vegetarian, you have to, follow certain things, you have to have been practicing it for so many years. And he was saying to his teacher, it's like, these rules aren't necessary anymore. We need spiritual teachings. We need to make this accessible. We need to find ways to make it more available to more people. And as the story goes, it seems that Babaji kind of set up this whole conversation just so that Sri M, this is my interpretation, so that Sri M can actually vocalize these pieces and heal this karmic piece around judgment and restrictiveness and repression and shaming around practitioners and people that want to wake up, people that want to have a spiritual practice. And then he was given permission to teach and to sort of lighten all the rules, lighten all the restrictions, all the constructs. We have to be able to ask the question for everything in our life: what is it for? And is it working? And while the traditions are so important because they're authentic, they come from direct experience, there is not one teacher ever in the world that has come across a path of realization, has shared a path of realization that is universally true and relevant and right for every single person. Every path towards awakening has to be individualized. And so the wisdom of Saturn in Sag is understanding that, like the ability to really have a deep connection to something that works and to understand, okay, I need to discipline myself. I need to train myself. And this is the last piece that I'll say. The work here is developing greater ethics, greater consciousness, greater responsibility, greater attunement to the energy of honesty, the energy of authenticity. And spiritual development really happens through being really honest with ourselves. If we're really honest with ourselves, if we're authentic on our soul journey, then we'll end right here and keep it short.
Oh. True Sag style. Right? We can't.
We're trying to keep it tight. It's a good idea. Yeah, I can see.
When we get onto something, I have to say my favorite thing that you offered, and I loved it all, of course. Can't get enough of all of this, but was that when you were checking in with yourself because you had learned certain customs or beliefs within your religion that were wrong on the Sabbath, all these things that we've been conditioned to believe or to partake in. And I loved the process, Saturn, that you took upon in that way, like looking within yourself and asking yourself, where did that come from? And is it okay to play the mandolin today? Is it okay to turn the light on? And there are definitely times in my life, and of course that was occurring during a Saturn opposition transit, which is in place to test your own conditioning. I mean, can you break this down now? Can you be real? Can you be honest? Can you be authentic? And is this, are these conditioned beliefs, or are these something that you need to pay attention to? And so, I really enjoyed hearing that, because I feel like it's a great exercise for anybody that starts to feel something unnatural, an unnatural guilt, a conditioned guilt. We all experience two different types of guilt. Conditioned guilt, which is what we learn through cultures and communities and society and family. And that's a type of guilt that we can purge, and it's intended to purge. And then there's natural guilt, which I think about with Saturn and Sagittarius, which is in all of us will hold on to forever for a good reason. We all will hold on to the guilt of things that we know we did that were wrong, that were natural things that we know were wrong, so we do not do them again.
Right. And I can say that part of the whole dynamic here is there can be guilt because of lying. Right? Saturn and
exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's a great one.
Fraud, pretending to be something that you're not, and having really hurt others or alienated others or misled others.
Right, exactly. And so that guilt from those lies, or you're, feeling like a charlatan or some false example of who you actually are, that's going to weigh the soul down, and it's just going to hang out there like a fog in the soul. And so you know, stay clear and speak authentically, right? And so, yeah, that a Sagittarian distorted is, well, be a distortion of truth or fabrication of truth, right? An exaggeration of truth. And so that's also, that would be, you know, a distorted example of Sagittarius. But anyway, thank you for sharing all that you did. And Stace, do you want to comment before we move to our last speaker?
Just that I really got what you were saying about within that story of being on the plane and you're like, I need to defend this. It's interesting because you can approach that two different ways. You can approach it as I'm right and you're wrong, or you can share your truth and your experience, and it's never about I'm right, I'm wrong, because everyone is on their own path. And it's that Sagittarius, you've got to find your path. And yeah.
Right.
You know, I'm sorry, that wasn't very packaged, but yeah, those were just my revolving thoughts.
All right. Thank you so much, Tari. Let's move to our final guest. Patricia Walsh is here with us, another Sag. We have Deva, myself, Ari, and Patricia Walsh. We're all born within the first 10 days of December. So celebrating the Sag group today. Jeffrey Wolfe Green, also a Sag, December 2nd birthday. So welcome, Patricia. Are you there?
I am here. Thank you.
Looking for you. There you are. Hi.
Hi. Hi. Yeah, I'm a Sag. I'm a 9th house Sag Sun conjunct the MC. And my it's the ruler of my North Node. So I'm definitely meant to be doing a lot of Sag stuff this life. And my Mercury's in Sag, conjunct the galactic center. So speaking of pulling things from the galactic center, which is exactly what evolutionary astrology is. I mean, there's so much to say. I'm so glad that I got to hear. Oh, what a perfect image, because
So
I want to start. I want to start with the Centaur. I want to talk about the Centaur a little bit. So the image of Sag, as we know from the constellation, the Centaur, has come to be a patricized, or in the patriarchal view, you know, it's dominion over nature. But in the pre-patriarchal view, it's fused with nature. So it's not power over, you know, it's power of. And the freedom that gives the soul the power to delight in nature. I mean, we know that the centaurs in Greek mythology were randy and, you know, tricksters, as well as Chiron. Chiron, you know, the wise healer, teacher, etc. But their general nature was, you know, seemed to be that they were just screwing everything in sight. When we look at the natural zodiac, you know, Sag follows this really intense scorpionic energy, and as a constellation, the arrow of the centaur, you know, the centaur's arrow points to Antares, which is the heart of the scorpion. So to a certain degree, there's something that is slain or pierced in Scorpio that then carries on into Sag. And there's a kind of, it's like the necessity of breaking from that intensity, the depth, the underworld depth of the soul, and breaking into levity that allows the continuation on the path, you know, the journey. This is funny, I'm in a new place here, and one of the first things I bought for my new place, I don't know if you can see this, let me see if I can see it. It's called, it's little coasters, and it says, follow your arrow, right?
Oh, I love that.
Which is a very Sag thing. And I saw it in the store and I said, that's totally me. And, you know, I also want to say, when I was a kid, I had no idea how much I was enacting the Sagittarius archetype instinctively, because I had a horse and I used to go off into the forest, and many times I would bring my bow and arrow with me and I would shoot from horseback at full gallop. And sometimes, because I would go so deep into the forest, I would just spend the whole day out there with my horse. I would ride naked, breasted, just take my shirt off and just be shooting. On my horse named Oberon for the King of the Fairies from Midsummer's Night Dream, right? So yes, the horse. So when we think of, like I said, the horse is the symbol of freedom, right? So we have the Centaur. Now, which is the fusion with nature, and that's where the freedom comes. So Jupiter, and I'm going to talk about the sun and the moon, but Jupiter relates to, so when we talk about fusion is a big part of the Sag archetype, as is synthesis, as we know. And the fusion that happens there, it's kind of Jupiter referring to Neptune. So if we think about it, Jupiter's kind of within the bounds of Saturn. So we would say that it's again, rising out of Scorpio, it's like the most refined that the human soul can be when it is fused in nature. Before the Neptunian, boundless expansion into spirit. So I always say that Scorpio brings us to the woundedness of the soul, and Sag brings us to the wonder of the soul. Right, and we need this. So the fusion, to me, the turning point, all mutable signs sit at a turning point. To me, the turning point here in Sagittarius is soul to spirit. And I always use this Dalai Lama quote, which I love. He talks about, I quote him, he says, "I call the high light aspects of my being spirit and the dark heavy aspects soul. And soul is at home in the deep shaded valleys where the heavy torpid flowers saturated with black grow there. And spirit is a land of high white peaks and glittering jewel-like lakes and flowers. And people need to climb the mountain, not simply because it's there, but because soulful divinity needs to be mated with spirit." And this is what this Sag is doing. And when we say Sag as this bringing us to our authentic self, the discovery of soul and soul desire and the purification and transformation that happens in Scorpio, right? This turning of the wheel again, or this turning of the next leg of the journey in Sag, brings that all to a buoyancy that allows us to feel that level of expansion that then will wake us to spirit, right? Which leads me to, like, what is the authentic self? And this is funny, I led some groups in, a form of experiential astrology that I'm teaching called Kairos astrology. And we did a journey, and this is a little different archetypes, but we did a journey of moving from our descendant to our ascendant, right? So when we think of the fire trine, the ascendant is naturally ruled by Aries, and as Jeffrey always said, it's the instinctive self, whereas the persona is the constructed persona that we put on. And as Ari was talking about, with Saturn, the conditioning that we experience, all of this is part of our mask and our persona, that we don't know what our instinctual self is. There's a loss of the instinctual self just naturally by today's society. So we did these journeys, and I had people just journey, again, not in the head. This is a really embodied exercise to just really get into one's persona and then journey back to the instinctual self, to imagine that we're journeying towards the ascendant. And what was interesting to see in a group of, 30 people or so, that they all returned to an animal nature. Right? They all moved from some however they were embodying their persona to an animal nature. And so when we think of, Aries as this instinctual and the Centaur, this beautiful marriage, synthesis of human and animal nature, that is part of getting back to the authentic self. I mean, part of the difficulty we all know about the estrangement from nature and so on. And we've had a lot of gift from the scientific method, right? But what this reductionist thinking, this reductionist materialistic view of nature, it's forced us into an either or and not an and also. And I have to say, my Sag nature, that drives people crazy, because I'm completely open to and also, right? It doesn't mean that I don't stand in a truth, but I'm always open to an and also and not an either or. And this is also the kind of synthesis we need to get back to. And part of what we've been, you know, with the whole Cartesian mind-body split, etc., we've been so severed from this ability to have this and also. Another quote I want to share is kind of funny, just speaking of estrangement, a book I carry around with me, again, maybe you can see it, I know it's backwards, Charles Eisenstein, it's The Ascent of Humanity. And it's basically like the whole history of humanity, and from the psycho-spiritual civilization and the human sense of self. It's quite a tome, as you can see. And one of his quotes says, "How ironic is it that the end point of this vast campaign to make the world ours was to exclude ourselves from the world entirely. The human realm is expanded to encompass all reality, yet we're alone in the universe." I mean, that's a sad sense of humor. That's a bit ironic, right? So when we talk about sun, so the sun is gravity of consciousness. It's this, again, it's something pulling us. It's the seat of, you know, the center of our consciousness, pulling us to the gravity of our center. The sun symbol is the circle with the dot, right? So it's something always returning us to the center, synthesizing. And the core there, the symbol for me, Sag, what I was getting at, was the sun in Sag is about the authentic self, right? Yeah, that's too far to get into. I was going to go back to Sumerian myth, but that might be a little bit, I'm going to go off into shoot some arrows way too far. I mean, it's really interesting when you follow some of the ancient ways that it's become twisted by the patriarchy and where it was before. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about the moon. Let's talk about moon in Sag. So to me, I think, you know, moon, as we know, is the representation of our image of ourself, our ego self, but also our emotional body. And so, you know, the buoyancy of Sag is a beautiful thing. And as we know, compensation can actually be, to me, it's a power, it's a gift and a curse at the same time. I think that compensation as a natural function of the psyche allows one to navigate through the slings and arrows of human existence, right? And I think that in order for a sun in Sag or a moon in Sag to really feel its authentic self, it has to have meaning, right? And so in moon, where we suffer these kinds of slings and arrows of human existence, I think compensation can be a step to allow, I think compensation is part of the healing process if it's used correctly, that you know, compensation can give that buoyancy to then find, you know, I would say a sense of detachment, but a sense of that eagle eye perspective that Sag can have, that then allows one to find the meaning in the trauma or the meaning in the, you know, in whatever the emotional wound was. So I think that it's essential for the moon in Sag to recognize, you know, not to use compensation as a defense, but to use compensation to then expand into finding further what is that meaning, what is the soul expression. I mean, as Jeffrey always said, you know, astrology is a science of observation and correlation. And, you know, nature has it all. Nature has all of the answers. Speaking of the galactic center, in the, I'm trying to remember the tribe, in the Alaskan tribe, they far north Alaskan people, there's a teacher, you can find him on YouTube. His name is Larry Ilarian. He is from this tribe, and he talks about their alignment to the womb at the center of the universe. If you Google womb at the center of the universe, you'll get his teachings. And he talks about all of their knowledge came from the womb at the center of the universe. A feminine principle, by the way, and he talks about the power of the feminine and how that is the birth of wisdom and all of the knowledge that that their people have. And back to one of the other speakers that was talking about this, you know, I've looked a lot at old cave paintings hundreds of thousands of years ago, and many of them point to knowledge that's gained from journeying to the center of the universe, journeying to this galactic center to gain knowledge, right? In essence, this is, you know, and so that's where it is in the shamanic perspective, in the animistic shamanic perspective, that everything we need to know is accessible to us just by observation and correlation and reaching out and journeying there. Journeying meaning opening up Jupiter, expanding our consciousness to allow what is already existent there. I mean, that's the beauty of what indigenous peoples knowledge brings to us, where it isn't a conquering, it's that cooperative understanding. And like I said, so many of these cave paintings point to this is so deep in our, what I call our archaic ancestral consciousness. So back to the moon is feeling our way back there. But I think that part of the primal wound in the moon in Sag is one has to come to terms with the estrangement of where one is. And so it's collective estrangement, but it's also one's own inner estrangement, because we don't get to the authentic self unless we have congruence, and congruence equals truth, right? Congruence is exactly as the Hermetic principle said, as above, so below, as within, so without, right? The four cardinal directions, as above, so below, as within, so without. When that is congruent, then you are living in truth. Then you are living in this evident, you know, self-evident. I remind myself of, okay, so I'm a Sag, as I said, you know, with Mercury and Sag. And when I was a kid, I still am very philosophical and ponderous, but when I was a kid, I was really ponderous, and mostly ponderous in nature. And I distinctly remember about 7th or 8th grade, I was laying under a tree and the sun was coming through the leaves, and I was just laying there, and I was noticing the leaves attached to the branch, attached to the tree, or the other way around, the trunk and and then the leaves, and then all of the forest, and so on and so forth. And my mind instantly said, or maybe it was my intuitive self instantly said, it seems to be an evident truth in nature that all things are made up of smaller parts. Because I started to imagine, look, you know, the sun coming through the leaf, and then the individual cells, and then those cells made up from atoms, and then those atoms made up from, and then instantly, you know, anybody who's ever seen a diagram of an atom has to think of the solar system, because it's right there. I mean, you know, yeah. And so to me, it was like everything in the universe, one truth seems to hold true, no matter how macrocosmic or microcosmic, that everything is made up of smaller parts. And then I went to, you know, the philosophical religious side, which must mean that we are cells in God's body. And so that everything is just a single cell in God's body. it's all there, right? If you're looking for it, it's all there. It's just having the open mind to look at the, you know, the wisdom and the connection that's already there. So Sun in Sag, you know, just to summarize, synthesis, always following the buoyancy and gravity of self that brings one back to authentic self. And Moon in Sag is again, the buoyancy that can be compensation that leads to the meaning of, right? Which allows us to then synthesize and integrate, like I said, all the slings and arrows of human nature, or that, as Hamlet would say, that the flesh is heir to.
Thank you, Patricia. So, first of all, how did I not know about this bare-breasted horse riding bow and arrow?
I had a horse for, oh God, he was a beautiful thoroughbred, Oberon. I had him in my 20s. And yeah, no, seriously, just like, you know, you're out there in the forest. I would just go for hours and hours and hours so deep out into the country and just take off my shirt and gallop and shoot some arrows. Fortunately, I didn't have to cut off a breast to do that like the Amazons did, but, but yeah, there it is.
Oh my God, I can't even believe I didn't know that. And I think that is so fabulous. I want that experience myself.
You got to try it. It's really full gallop, you know, and my horse was so smooth. He was like a Cadillac. He had the best, no, he had the best gait. Like he literally at full gallop, he was just like a Cadillac. He was so smooth. You know, it was so, I'd hold the reins in my teeth.
Oh my God. Get out of here. This is crazy. I love that story. You know, and I appreciate how you brought up the phenomena of compensation, because compensation is certainly a Sag phenomena. And, you know, sometimes it can be used in ways that sort of keep the limitations in place, but it can also be the kind of thing, you know, there's this saying, fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to say it's good to fake it, but it's like jumping on a train and believing in yourself in ways that you haven't believed in yourself, and just trying to let it flow. And that's a wonderful quality of Sag.
Yeah, I am totally not into, you know, I'm totally not into bypassing. I'm way into doing the chthonic, Plutonian, cathartic work. But, you know, early on in my life when I read Theosophy, one of the things that I got from that was they talked about a principle of esoteric healing, which is act, excuse me, act as if. Mm-hmm. So, and that's what you're talking about. So they're saying in esoteric healing, to really bring something to spirit level, you act as if. So, you know, if you're scared of something, you act as if you're not. Right? That's a Sag quality, right? That's a quality that you can find within yourself. You know, you might say it's courage, but it's more refined than Leonian courage, right? In the fire trine. It's to just act as if, because it involves creative imagination to do so also, which is Jupiter referring to Neptune. Again, remembering that Jupiter and Neptune are co-rulers, ancient rulers of Pisces. I have Jupiter in Pisces in the 12th house too. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, I loved all of it, Patricia. But one thing that you said toward the end about all of the knowledge is held in the womb of the universe, or all that we need to know is held in the womb of the universe. That moon in Sag, and that, you know, all that we need to know we can find in nature, right? With that moon there, and that resonated so deeply for me. And another thing too, with the moon in Sag, you mentioned an estrangement. It can be that alienation too, because with moon and Sag souls, they never really feel at home anywhere, right? They're always looking to the next horizon, or they're just world travelers, and you, of course, you're not going to feel at home when you're going to a new country every time and you don't know the language and you maybe haven't tasted that food. But if you never travel from this country or the country you were born in, if you have a moon in Sag, there's that feeling of never really being at home anywhere, but yet also being able to create home anywhere you go, right? Like the gypsy spirit.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's the negative and the, because I did that too. I traveled the world for 20 years, right? You know, in different capacities. And as a Sag sun, it was, you know, this is something Jeffrey always said, mutable signs find their center in movement. Right. So when you're on now, so there, but there's a difference about being on the run and running from oneself and being in one center and moving or coming deeper into one center through the process of movement. I found that very much from traveling. Right?
Or so riding the horse.
Or riding the horse, exactly, right. I found it very much from traveling and because it does bring you deeper into yourself, right? You're relying more on your resources as you're traveling, and your senses are so much more acute when you're in a new place, the smells and the tastes and all of that, right? You know, like I said, Sag is partly about delighting in the soul. Right, finding the delight of the soul, the wonder of the soul.
Yeah, very adaptable.
Yeah.
All right, what an awesome show. I just love this. And as we always do every time, we have our musician in the group, Ari Moshe, to share a closing song for us. So pass the baton to you.
All right, everyone. So this song came through many years ago in the forest, and I feel it's sort of my Sagittarius theme song.
Thank you, Ari. Oh my goodness. You know what? This brings up very sublime memories for me when I had gone through a hard time and you happened to be passing through and came to stay for a bit. And we sang this song together on my couch. And I just remember you and your guitar and you just singing with the fullness of your spirit. And, you know, I'm shy when I sing, but you opened me up and we sang together. We sang this song together, and like, I will never forget it. And so thank you for sharing this with us today.
I love singing with you.
We'll have to do it soon.
Again soon.
Oh, Patricia said she misses her tribe, and that is really what we are. We are a tribe of natural people doing our best to try and remind you all of what it means to be natural. We work every day at it, fall on our face and keep going. It's not a perfect process. So, well, we are so excited to share too that this series is going to be a book, and it's going to come out in 2021. I'm going to compile with the help of Linda and Stacie and all of our wonderful volunteers who are helping transcribe these shows to get all this wonderful material into a book, a body of work for you all to enjoy and to pour through. And so very much looking forward to that. And we're going to finish this series by the end of the year, by the end of 2020. So the intention, of course, was to bring everybody together during this crazy time and remind ourselves what it means to be natural. I'd like to see that list of volunteers, Linda.
Please. Okay, so first of all, I have to say this is the most nervous that I am about everything on this show today, because I want to get these names right, because this is a group of people. I'm just going to give a quick, this is a group of people, extraordinary people who are contributing their time and their talents and their wisdom to making this into a book that we can all appreciate going forward. So I'm behind. So Annie Kidau, Emma Sayardi, Eugenia Eos, I'm sorry, Jen Cashin. These are their pictures. These are our volunteers. Jennifer Cobb. Jonas Raman. Julia Beanie, who it's actually Talidi is another surname, or a name. Julia Talidi. Corey Clement, Linda Johnson, Linda Machina. We have Mara Tharwat, Matt Dragonstone, Monica Bravo, Neville Estrake, Nicole, Ines Harnish. I'm sorry, I'm bad. Nix Monokeros, must be Greek. Rachel Talia, Sarah DeHaven, Shelley Brown.
I'm overwhelmed with your contribution. Thank you, volunteers, so much for giving of your time and of yourself to support this body of work. And we have, thank you, Stacie, for sharing their names. And we have a natural astrology, another webinar coming up, a panel discussion on Capricorn, Saturday, October 31st, Halloween during the day. Hopefully we'll, you can catch this after the fact if you miss it on that day, but we will be back here Saturday, October 31st, 1 p.m. Pacific. And if you want to learn more about evolutionary astrology, there's a website, schoolofevolutionaryastrology.com, and you can get a hold of the original material taught by Jeffrey Wolfe Green. Thank you so much for joining us today. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste, everyone. Namaste.